Welcome back to Hard Money Jim, where we're all about money creation and its consequences. Now, one consequence of inflationary money creation is the rise of alternatives to fiat currencies, with Bitcoin being the most famous example. So Bitcoin is going to be our topic for today. There's an old Wall Street saying that nobody rings a bell at the top, meaning that no one's going to sound an alarm when a speculative asset reaches its peak price. But it feels like that just happened with Bitcoin. And the personal story I want to tell you today is not about, it's not Bitcoin bashing, but I'm going to give you a sober report from an eminent computer scientist. But first, I need to establish some context for how I got this information. Grant's Interest Rate Observer is the preeminent financial journal for professional investors. Ever since about 1983, editor Jim Grant has published a very erudite, insightful, and actually entertaining newsletter every 2 weeks, except for an August break. And as any Wall Street magnate will tell you, a subscription to Grant's is both expensive and indispensable. Now, on September 30th, I attended, as I have for many years, the annual Grant's Interest Rate Observer Fall Conference held in the luxurious Plaza Hotel on Central Park in Manhattan. Like its publication namesake, the Grant's Conference is both expensive and indispensable, as the speakers often reveal trends or portending events well before they hit the mainstream financial media. I can safely say that the high cost of the Grant's Conference has repaid me many times over in subsequent investment returns or just in avoiding disasters. For example, in December 2006, one speaker ripped the veil off the mortgage-backed securities business, definitively exposing the fraud embedded in their structure. And it was one of those mic drop moments for the crowd. As a result of that talk, I avoided the MBS space, which began to unravel within months, and that was then followed by the great financial crisis of 2008 and 9. So it's no accident that Grant's and the Plaza are located in the heart of Manhattan, which is in the heart of New York City, which is in the heart of global financial capitalism. And with this location, Grant's has access to sort of a critical mass of sophisticated investment money and financial research that's supported its operations for many years. The Grant's Conference attendees are private, they're rich, they're serious, and they're very astute. Of the hundreds of investment gatherings I've attended over many years, Grant's attendees are by far the most sophisticated. This fall's gathering kicked off with the usual all-star lineup. All the presentations were, as always, insightful, and they offered sophisticated analysis from various experts. Several speakers discussed the advantages of hedging a portfolio with gold, for example, which is pretty typical at a Grant's Conference. Now, the real surprise of the day was the final talk held late in the afternoon. And the speaker was David S.H. Rosenthal, Ph.D., a distinguished software engineer with a remarkable career in data security, cryptography, and distributed ledger technology. The title of his speech was, quote, "The Gaslit Asset Class," and it focused on Bitcoin. The theme was, Bitcoin is not what you have been conditioned to believe. Rosenthal's presentation was technical and dense, several decades of cryptocurrency expertise crammed into a 25-minute presentation. It was presented in the dry manner of an academic seminar, and yet it was also a jaw-dropping unmasking of Bitcoin that literally silenced a room that's brimming with financial experts. Now, unfortunately, a replay of Rosenthal's speech is not available unless you attended the conference, so I cannot share it with you. But the good news is that Professor Rosenthal has provided a verbatim transcript of his speech, complete with all the scholarly references, on his own blog post, which you should read. I promise you will not see Bitcoin in the same light after reading it. The Gaslit Asset Class was the perfect title for this talk. Consider what it means to be gaslit. The expression comes from the great 1944 film Gaslight, which revolves around psychological manipulation, deception, and the erosion of self-confidence. It explores how an abuser can systematically undermine a person's perception of reality, leading them to question their sanity. That's a phenomenon now commonly referred to as gaslighting. Now, in the story, Paula's husband, Gregory, secretly manipulates the gaslights in their home, causing them to flicker and dim. When Paula notices and mentions it, he dismisses her observations, insisting the lights are unchanged. And this causes Paula to doubt her perception of reality. Gregory then, exploiting Paula's trust and innocence, makes her question her own sanity, causing her to be confused and to become dependent on his version of reality. Okay, now spoiler alert, eventually Paula exposes Gregory's manipulation, so the story ends happily for her, but an important lesson from the story is that Paula should have trusted the evidence of her own senses. And this explains why I have never invested in Bitcoin. It's not because I ever thought I was being deliberately deceived, but because buying into it would have meant losing confidence in my judgment of what I think are its clear flaws, simply because all trusted authorities, financial advisors, government officials, and even the market itself, which is a powerful persuader, has told me for years that Bitcoin's a solid investment. Doubters like me, who saw flickering gaslights in the Bitcoin story, only to be told repeatedly that the light was really steady and strong, have sometimes doubted our sanity. Is it possible that such a powerful and persistent financial phenomenon like Bitcoin could be hollow at its core? Now comes along Professor David S.H. Rosenthal, and he steps up to tell us we're not so crazy after all. And he declared flatly, quote, "Much of what you have been told about cryptocurrency technology is gaslighting." Now, before I get into Rosenthal's talk, I want to take a minute to summarize my own longstanding skepticism about Bitcoin's suitability as an alternative to government fiat money. My misgivings fall into basically three categories. First, money, as defined by Ludwig von Mises, is a, quote, widely accepted medium of exchange. But Bitcoin has never been widely accepted, nor is it practical for use in everyday commerce. To illustrate, we know investors use Bitcoin to speculate on all manner of digital assets, but who uses it to pay the rent? In addition, Bitcoin's dollar price, its exchange value, is very volatile. And this alone makes it unsuitable as money, although some say that this volatility will eventually dampen. But it's hard to see how, as Bitcoin's highly correlated to tech stock prices, acting primarily like a speculative asset, a digital beanie baby. So my second misgiving is that Bitcoin transactions depend on shared social infrastructure, such as the internet and the electric grid. How could you transact Bitcoin if this public infrastructure were disrupted, even temporarily? Now, by contrast, physical cash or gold will still work when the lights go out. Third, Bitcoin is touted as ungovernable, that is, beyond the reach of government control. But some level of cooperation with government is always required for any money to function in an advanced economy, even if only to enforce the contracts between transacting parties. We know that Bitcoin's not immune from government intervention. China prohibits its citizens from transacting in Bitcoin, while willfully exploiting Bitcoin mining operations. And I'll have more on that in a minute. So for these reasons, I've never invested in Bitcoin because its stated purpose never seemed to match its observable characteristics, and I don't speculate in what I don't understand. However, I always rooted for Bitcoin because it represents an attempt at developing free market money, and who doesn't love free markets? So I would love to see Bitcoin succeed, and if it ever does, I will happily use it as a transactional currency. And now comes along Professor Rosenthal, who not only echoes my concerns, but he adds more of his own worries. backed up by years of expertise, experience, and research. And so, what are the claims the Bitcoiners have relied on? Rosenthal's lead slide in his presentation spells them out in order. First, the system was trustless. In other words, trustless means it does not need a third party to verify its authenticity. Trustless because it was decentralized. Two, it was a medium of exchange for buying and selling in the real world. Three, transactions were faster and cheaper than in the existing financial system. Four, it was secured by proof of work and cryptography. Five, it was privacy preserving. These are all the promises of Bitcoin from Professor Rosenthal. Quote, "These claims are all either false or misleading," he declared. Even Bitcoin's mysterious creator, Satoshi Nakamoto, knew of Bitcoin's shortcomings. Why did Satoshi go dark in 2010, never to return, leaving his unfinished work to his acolytes? Well, we may never know, but what we do know is that, quote, "In most cases, Nakamoto's own writings show that he knew this, but his acolytes were gaslighting." Now, I don't have the expertise to reprise Rosenthal's entire talk. Instead, I'm going to summarize a few important highlights. But all serious investors, including investment advisors urging their clients to buy Bitcoin, should read Rosenthal's entire transcript. Here are a few Rosenthal stunners. Is it decentralized? Far from it. Numerous centralizing forces built into Bitcoin cause gradual centralization over time. Today, Bitmain, the Chinese digital mining consortium, potentially controls 51% of the Bitcoin network, making attacks on the database not only possible, but likely. In the Q&A, Rosenthal elaborated on this. He said, given the dominance of Bitmain, what is the vulnerability of American investors to Chinese attack? Quote, "So I'm not saying this is what's happening. I'm saying that potentially the extent of Bitmain's control over the Bitcoin mining industry gives China a weapon, because not now, but given the policies of the current administration, cryptocurrencies will form a significant part of the U.S. financial system," unquote. What about Bitcoin's promise as a medium of exchange? Bitcoin is not and cannot be used in everyday commerce. How would you use it in a vending machine, for example? When you expect your granola bar within 10 seconds of inputting your payment, Bitcoin's processing time is about 10 minutes. Using Bitcoin requires off-ramps and applications welded on top of the Bitcoin database. In other words, you have to get out of Bitcoin to use it. And here's Rosenthal, quote, "The fascinating thing about cryptocurrency technology is the number of ways people have developed and how much they are willing to pay to avoid actually using it. What other transformative technology has had people desperate not to use it?" Okay, is Bitcoin faster and cheaper? In fact, says the professor, Bitcoin's transactions are inherently slow and may take hours to verify, and they're expensive. The average transaction cost is about $100. Moreover, when everyone wants to transact at the same time, the average wait time goes way up. Is Bitcoin secured by proof of work? Identifying some of the many flaws of the proof of work cryptography security system, Rosenthal quotes a report from the Bank of International Settlements. Quote, "Proof of work can only achieve payment security if mining income is high, but the transaction market cannot generate an adequate level of income. The economic design of the transaction market fails to generate high enough fees." In addition, Bitcoin's proof of work verification is not impregnable in the coming age of quantum computing. Not only is quantum capable of hacking the system, but there's a huge economic incentive to do so, because some 20% of Bitcoin's keys have been lost. If they could be recovered by a quantum cyber sleuth, so to speak, the reward would be worth about $460 billion at today's price. And that's a pretty powerful incentive to hack the system. Okay, is Bitcoin privacy preserving? Well, in theory, yes. In practice, no. Bitcoin privacy depends on digital keys known only to the owner. But in practice, users need to use exchanges and apps that tie the user to a public key. So according to Rosenthal, there's a flourishing ecosystem today of companies that de-anonymize wallets by tracing the user's web and pattern of transactions. So he may not be as anonymous as you think. Okay, concluding his remarks, the professor cast one more pearl regarding the financial risk inherent in Bitcoin. The AI bubble, he reminded us, is heavily influencing equities. And in the event of an epic AI bust, the Standard & Poor's 500 would likely nosedive. Given the strong and increasing correlation between equities and cryptocurrencies, most stocks would crash right along with the AI leaders. Here's Rosenthal, quote, "The automatic liquidation of leveraged long positions in DeFi means decentralized finance, will start, causing a self-reinforcing downturn, revealing bugs in IT systems and smart contracts as their assumptions of adequate resources and timely responses are violated." When he ended his talk, you could hear a pin drop in that room, and I thought I heard the sound of 300 mental models fracturing in real time. How could it be that these sophisticated investors had never heard Rosenthal's warnings before? Well, I think the answer is that the knowledge system of cryptocurrencies is broken. Alex Epstein, the author of Our Fossil Future, defines a knowledge system as, quote, "the people and institutions we rely upon to research, synthesize, disseminate, and evaluate expert knowledge." In the case of Bitcoin, most of the players in this very complex information system are probably the gaslit and not the gaslighters. And you can't help but note that its devotees tout Bitcoin as, quote, "trustless money," while trusting a third party, a flawed third party knowledge system to tell them that Bitcoin is trustless, which is ironic to say the least. Do the holders of Bitcoin need another Bitcoin to verify Bitcoin? As Rosenthal puts it, quote, "Bitcoin's massive cost is a result of its lack of trust. Users pay this massive cost, but they don't get a trustless system. They just get a system that makes the trust a bit harder to see." Unquote. In essence, Rosenthal's arguing that cryptocurrency's success is an illusion, fueled by speculation and hype, but undermined by a technology that's too fragile for widespread use. So while it appears groundbreaking in theory, in reality, Bitcoin is a Rube Goldberg machine for which people are paying a fortune just to pretend it works. And this aligns with Rosenthal's broader critique, which champions practical, sustainable innovation over buzzwords. So in contrast to Bitcoin, says Rosenthal, other technological advances overcame productivity barriers by perfecting their innovations rather than working around them. For example, electricity's initial safety risks were worth taking because of electricity's productivity gains. Same with automobiles. And the early smartphones with tiny screens and limited batteries, well, they were limited, but more applications and an easy user interface attracted users who wanted their conveniences. But Bitcoin is a solution in search of a problem. It's kind of a hammer in need of a nail. As far as I can tell, it solves no problems that people actually want to solve or actually care about. The problems that it purports to address, privacy, security, cost to transact, speed to transact, those are all pretty well under control in the banking system, thank you very much. And so in my view, Bitcoin enthusiasm seems to be driven, at least in part, by some kind of weird anti-bank libertarianism rather than any real social need or real social problem. Now, if you're interested, Rosenthal's critique of blockchainism expands on these ideas, and here's a link to a very good YouTube presentation that he did of this critique. As we wrap up here, let me offer a contrasting viewpoint on Bitcoin from the Chinese perspective. Chinese authorities have for many years encouraged their citizens to own and save physical gold. At the same time, they've prohibited these same citizens from purchasing or selling Bitcoin. So to Americans, Bitcoin is, quote, digital gold, but to the Chinese, gold is, quote, physical Bitcoin. What do the Chinese see that we do not see? Who has the right formula? Well, I'm going to let you decide that for yourself. All right, did Rosenthal call the top of the Bitcoin price? I don't know, and only time will tell. Bitcoin's all-time high price so far was $126,000 plus on October 6th of this year. And as I'm recording this today, the price, last price I saw was $110,500. In closing, I want to add a brief disclaimer. I am not telling you to buy or sell crypto. I've never owned any myself, but I am reporting the conclusions of an expert whose presentation had a powerful effect on me and which turned me from a Bitcoin agnostic to a disbeliever. You should seek your own investment advice from a trusted professional and make your own investment decisions. Okay, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please remember to hit the subscribe button below. Also, I wrote an essay version of this post last week for my Substack newsletter called Hard Money Jim, where a subscription is always free. And don't forget to check out my book, A Black Hole in Economics, available on Amazon. Okay, so long till next time, and be careful out there.